Shalom and welcome to Shikul Da'at. I'm Rabbi Josh Rose. What is required of a leader? In the Torah portion this week, we learn lessons about leadership. Some are lessons specifically about spiritual leadership, and others apply more generally. We notice that this Torah portion alone, of all of those from our introduction to Moses back at the beginning of the book of Exodus to the end of the Torah, in this one alone, there is no mention of Moses' name. He's there in the background. God addresses him as Atah, meaning you, but not by the name Moses. And Aaron, about whom we have not heard so much this far, his name appears about 30 times in this week's Torah portion. Now, Aaron is referred to only for one reason, his public persona. Half of Tetzaveh is concerned with the clothing that Aaron and his sons as priests will wear, and the other half describes the inauguration rituals and offerings to be performed once the tabernacle is in use. Moses' absence, interestingly, coincides with the week of his yahrzeit, which was yesterday, the 7th of Adar. But just as we notice Moses' absence from the text, we notice the appearance of Aaron figuratively and literally. We focus on his clothing. Moses cedes leadership and in doing so makes space for his brother. In fact, the Midrash explains that Moses should have ascended to the priesthood. That was God's original plan, so to speak. But Moses' repeated resistance to God's demand early in the story of Shemot disqualified him. What dignity and self-discipline it takes for a leader to cede control to another leader. And the test of Moses is even more difficult because at this moment, when his own ego might have clung to the hope that he would inhabit the glory of the office of the priesthood, he's not merely asked to step aside. He himself is to be the agent of Aaron's ascent. The Torah says, "V'ata akrev elecha et Aaron achicha et banav ito mitoch bnei Yisrael." You shall bring forward your brother Aaron. And actually, the text literally says, you shall bring close Aaron, your brother, to you, with his sons from among the Israelites to serve me as priests. So, the first two lessons in leadership come from Moses. Make space for other leaders, and overcome your own desire to grasp a role that you may have once coveted. Allow the other to ascend to a position you might have taken when that is what is called for. Let's move now to the priestly clothing. It was elaborate, highly decorative, a tunic, a breastplate decorated with engraved stones, fixtures on the shoulders, a very specific kind of head covering, among other things. About 40 verses of the Torah are taken to describe these vestments. Highlighted by the elaborate costume is the fact that Aaron's role is much greater than he. He wears on his chest 2 stones bearing the names of the 12 tribes, 6 engraved on each, worn as a symbolic statement before God, or as the Seforno says, as a reminder to himself, and as a reminder that he is indivisible from the people Israel. He's not only its representative, but the embodiment of the people. Each ritual, each action, each decision that Aaron makes radiates out in importance. He cannot separate what he does in this office from its significance for the people of which he is part. The Talmud has a fascinating passage in discussing the garments. It says, the robe, that is the robe worn by the high priest, atoned for bloodshed. The breeches atoned for lewdness. The turban made atonement for arrogance. The belt atoned for impure thoughts. The breastplate atoned for neglect of civil laws. The apron atoned for idolatry. The cloak atoned for slander. And the crown worn on the forehead atoned for brazenness. So Aaron's public appearance is symbolic of personal and communal moral responsibility. You literally can't look at him without being reminded of proper conduct. His clothing, in a sense, becomes more important than Aaron himself. In fact, though Moses is the one whose name does not appear, we might imagine that Aaron himself is absent from the story. That is, that the focus is not on the individual and the person and his personality, but rather the public role that he fulfills. And what is that role? Moral growth and spiritual responsibility. What a stark contrast with how we usually think of leadership. We usually look at the individual as a leader. Her quality is measured by skill, intelligence, electability, knowledge, charisma, etc. And we look at the person in a vacuum, sort of. We don't see ourselves in the leader. We do not tend to see in the person the opportunity to examine ourselves and our shortcomings. In our time, the leader has become an agent of desire and power, not an agent of moral obligation or striving. But what about the leader as a person? Turning our attention to the inauguration rituals outlined in our parashah, the Torah, after describing all of the clothing, moves to this inauguration ritual that will take place when the Mishkan is up and operational, so to speak. And it subtly highlights a problem with Aaron as the leader. It says, "V'zeh hadavar asher ta'aseh lehem lakadesh otam lachahen li lekach par echad ben bakar ve'elim shnayim tamimim." This is what you shall do to them, that is what Moses shall do to the priests, in consecrating them to serve me as priests. Take a young bull of the herd and 2 rams without blemish, and then it goes on to describe the offering that will be made as an inauguration. Rashi brings a midrash that makes the connection for us. This bull that they're required to offer, that Aaron is required to offer for the inauguration, is an atonement for another bull, that is, the golden calf, in whose construction Aaron played a central role. That this story does not appear until next week's Torah portion is not a problem, because there's a view that the Torah's narration is not in chronological order, which is a fascinating topic for another time. But imagine the moment when Aaron will learn that to become the priest, his first act must be to offer up this living symbol of his public shame. How overwhelming and how humbling, and what cause for introspection that moment must have been. But of course, there is just no other way. The representative of the people before God cannot be stained with the sin of falsehood and error for which he has not yet taken responsibility, which is why the act is not only a visual reminder of Aaron's sin, but also an actual atonement. He himself must make a reckoning. We know only too well the predictable evasion and denial of leaders in our day when they're faced with some ugly episode from earlier in their lives. Rare is the leader who will take responsibility in a full-throated and unqualified way. In Aaron's case, such reckoning is actually a prerequisite to his ability to perform his public role. As Aaron moves to the center of the Torah portion and Moses fades to the background, Tetzaveh offers us these important insights into the quality of leadership. In fact, though, these lessons are things that every person should think about in creating a healthy spiritual relationship to others. So, some questions for us to ask ourselves that are drawn from leadership but apply to our own lives. Do we fill up all the spaces in relationships or in groups, or do we, like Moses, allow ourselves to step back so another can come forward? Do we insist on our own right to a certain role or a certain moment of attention, or do we actively invite in others to come close, to take the lead, as Moses did by inviting in Aaron? Do we call to mind our people, symbolically wearing the names of the tribes, to remind us that we are part of a community much bigger than ourselves? In a world of individuals, do we dare to accept the responsibility of seeing our acts as being tied to the moral status of our people? Can we see ourselves as being obligated in the spiritual elevation of the other people in our community? Finally, and most importantly, do we, as did Aaron, take responsibility for our own errors and transgressions as a first step in our lives, and therefore a first step in our own growth? Just as we cannot serve others fully until we have looked inward to heal ourselves, though, so too do we have to remember that no mistake, no error, no misbegotten path, no matter how significant and no matter how public, can stop us from overcoming, as did Aaron, and stepping forward to increase the holiness of our people and of the world. Thank you so much for listening. Have a great Shabbat.